You are fired!
She thought she had just fired a lazy old janitor, but before the day was over, she would discover she had just humiliated the one man who owned everything around her. And by sunset, the career she had spent 15 years building would be hanging by a thread. The towering glass headquarters of Westbridge Technologies dominated downtown Chicago, reflecting the morning sunlight like a monument to ambition. Inside, hundreds of employees hurried through the marble lobby with coffee cups in hand, their footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be. Everyone except one man. On the far side of the building, hidden behind a maintenance hallway, an elderly janitor sat quietly in a worn wooden chair. His gray uniform was clean but faded from years of use. His work cart stood beside him with a mop, bucket, and neatly arranged cleaning supplies. His name was Benjamin Carter. At 72 years old, Benjamin looked like someone life had slowly worn down. His silver hair peeked from beneath a navy maintenance cap, and deep lines surrounded kind blue eyes that rarely showed anger. This morning, however, his eyes were closed. His head rested gently against the wall. To anyone walking past, it looked as though the old janitor had fallen asleep during work. What no one noticed was the small bottle of heart medication lying beside his lunchbox. Benjamin wasn't lazy. He had worked through the previous night after suffering chest pains at home. Rather than call in sick, he had quietly reported for work, refusing to disappoint the people who depended on him. He only intended to rest for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That was all. Unfortunately, someone else was walking toward the maintenance corridor. Her name was Victoria Reynolds. At 38 years old, Victoria was the company's newly promoted Chief Operations Officer. Brilliant. Disciplined. Demanding. And feared by almost everyone in the building. She believed that success belonged only to those willing to outwork everyone else. Her office lights were always the first to turn on each morning. She answered emails before sunrise. She expected perfection. And she had absolutely no patience for excuses. Employees often joked that Victoria could spot a mistake from across the building. But nobody laughed when she was around. As she walked briskly through the hallway in an elegant navy business suit, expensive heels clicking sharply against the floor, 2 department managers hurried behind her carrying folders and tablets. "We're expecting the investors at 10, one manager said nervously. "The presentation is ready." "It had better be," Victoria replied without slowing down. "The lobby windows have fingerprints on them. I noticed a burned-out light in conference room B. And someone left empty coffee cups near reception." Her voice was calm. But every sentence made the managers more anxious. "I don't tolerate carelessness," she continued. "If people can't perform simple responsibilities, they shouldn't be working here." The managers exchanged worried glances. Everyone knew Victoria meant exactly what she said. As they turned the corner toward the maintenance hallway, Victoria suddenly stopped. Her eyes narrowed. There, sitting beside the cleaning cart, was Benjamin. Fast asleep. Silence filled the hallway. One manager whispered carefully, "Perhaps he isn't feeling well." Victoria folded her arms. "He looks comfortable enough." Another manager added, "Should we wake him first?" Victoria's expression hardened. No. She stepped closer until she stood directly in front of Benjamin. For several seconds she simply stared at him. Employees nearby began slowing down. Some pretended to organize files. Others stood frozen beside the elevators. Everyone sensed trouble. Victoria spoke loudly enough for the entire hallway to hear. "So this is what we're paying people for." Benjamin slowly opened his eyes. For a brief moment he looked confused. Then he immediately stood up. "I'm terribly sorry," he said politely. "I must have." Victoria interrupted before he could finish. "You must have decided that company time was your personal nap time." Benjamin lowered his head respectfully. "I wasn't feeling very well this morning. I only sat down for a moment." Victoria didn't ask another question. She didn't wonder whether the elderly man might actually be sick. She didn't notice the medication beside his lunchbox. She only saw what appeared to be an employee sleeping while everyone else worked. Her voice echoed across the hallway. This company rewards hard work, not laziness. Benjamin remained calm. I've worked in this building for many years. I've always tried to do my best. Victoria gave a short, humorless smile. Trying isn't enough. Several employees looked at Benjamin with sympathy. Most of them knew him well. He greeted everyone by name. He stayed late without complaining. He often repaired things that weren't even part of his job. More than once, he had quietly paid for lunch when younger employees forgot their wallets. He was one of the kindest people in the building. Yet nobody dared speak. Victoria turned to human resources. I want his employment terminated immediately. The hallway became completely silent. Benjamin blinked slowly. Not because he feared losing his job, but because he couldn't believe no one had asked why he had fallen asleep. He picked up his old lunchbox with trembling hands. The bottle of heart medication slipped from his pocket and rolled across the polished floor. It stopped. Right at Victoria's feet. She glanced down for only a second. Then looked away. Escort him out, she said coldly. Benjamin bent down, picked up the medicine, and placed it back into his pocket. Without arguing. Without raising his voice. Without defending himself. He simply nodded. I'm sorry if I disappointed anyone. Then, carrying nothing more than his small lunchbox, he quietly walked toward the exit. Not a single person knew that within just a few hours, the same executives now watching him leave would rise to their feet in stunned silence. Because the quiet old janitor they believed they had just fired was about to walk back into the building through a very different door. Benjamin Carter stepped out of Westbridge Technologies without looking back. The morning breeze carried the sounds of downtown Chicago, honking traffic, distant sirens, and hurried conversations, but none of it seemed to reach him. He paused on the sidewalk, slipped the bottle of heart medication from his pocket, and swallowed another pill with the last sip of water from his lunch bottle. His hand trembled slightly. Not from anger. From exhaustion. He glanced up at the towering headquarters he had helped build decades earlier. Thousands of windows reflected the bright sky, each one representing years of sacrifice, impossible decisions, and dreams that had once seemed unreachable. A faint smile crossed his face. So, that's how things are now, he whispered to himself. He adjusted his old maintenance cap and quietly walked toward a nearby park. Back inside the building, however, Victoria Reynolds was already moving on as if nothing important had happened. To her, firing Benjamin had simply been another management decision. No emotion. No hesitation. No regrets. She entered the executive conference room, where department heads were already seated around a long walnut table. The room overlooked the Chicago skyline, and every chair was occupied except the one at the head of the table, hers. As she entered, conversations stopped. Everyone straightened in their seats. Victoria didn't demand respect. She commanded it. She placed her leather portfolio on the table and looked around the room. I hope everyone is prepared, she said. Our investors arrive in less than an hour. Heads nodded immediately. No one wanted to disappoint her. Among those seated was Daniel Brooks, the company's human resources director. Daniel had worked at Westbridge for almost 12 years. Unlike Victoria, he believed leadership wasn't about fear. It was about earning trust. He had watched the incident in the hallway, and it continued to bother him. As the meeting began, he hesitated before speaking. Victoria. She looked up. Yes. I've been thinking about the janitor. Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Victoria closed her folder. What about him? Daniel chose his words carefully. He mentioned feeling sick. There was medication on the floor. Perhaps we should have asked if he needed medical attention before ending his employment. Victoria leaned back in her chair. If I make exceptions for one employee, every underperformer in this company will expect the same. Daniel remained calm. I wasn't suggesting an exception. I'm suggesting compassion. For a brief moment, the room became painfully quiet. Victoria's expression never changed. Compassion doesn't keep a company profitable. Discipline does. No one argued. Everyone knew the discussion was over. The meeting continued. Charts filled the large screen. Revenue numbers. Expansion plans. Investor expectations. Every detail mattered to Victoria. She had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder, beginning as an entry-level analyst fresh out of business school. She came from a modest family in Ohio. Nothing had ever been handed to her. She worked nights. She skipped vacations. She sacrificed birthdays, relationships, and countless weekends. Her entire identity became tied to success. Over time, success changed her. She stopped seeing people. She started seeing performance reports. Employees became productivity numbers. Departments became statistics. Mistakes became weaknesses. Some admired her discipline. Others feared her presence. Almost no one truly knew her. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Benjamin sat quietly on a park bench overlooking Lake Michigan. He watched children chasing pigeons while parents laughed nearby. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. Life continued peacefully around him. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed a single name. Emma Carter. His granddaughter. Benjamin smiled before answering. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Grandpa." Emma said cheerfully. "Did you remember your doctor's appointment this afternoon?" Benjamin chuckled softly. "I never forget. You promised me you wouldn't overwork yourself anymore." "I know. And don't tell me you're still cleaning that giant office building." Benjamin looked toward the distant skyline. "I'm finished there." Emma paused. "What do you mean?" "I think today was my last day." There was silence on the line. Did something happen? Benjamin didn't want to worry her. "Oh, just a misunderstanding." Emma wasn't convinced. "You never leave because of misunderstandings." Benjamin changed the subject. "How's law school?" She laughed. "I knew you'd do that. You always avoid talking about yourself." He smiled again. Some habits are difficult to break. After ending the call, Benjamin looked down at the silver watch on his wrist. It was old. Simple. And scratched from decades of use. Most people assumed it was inexpensive. Very few knew it had been a gift from his late wife on the day they officially founded Westbridge Technologies together 40 years earlier. He gently touched the engraving on the back. "Build people before buildings." Those had been his wife's words. Words he had never forgotten. Back at headquarters, excitement filled the executive floor. Luxury cars began arriving outside. The investors had reached the building. Receptionists adjusted their uniforms. Security officers stood at attention. Every executive prepared for the biggest presentation of the year. Daniel quietly approached Victoria before the meeting. "The chairman still hasn't arrived." Victoria glanced at her watch. "He rarely attends these meetings anyway." Daniel nodded. "That's true. I've actually never met him. Neither has most of the company." Victoria smiled confidently. "Whoever he is, I'm sure he'll appreciate today's numbers." Daniel hesitated. "I've always wondered why he keeps such a low profile. No interviews. No public appearances. No photographs." Victoria shrugged. "Some billionaires enjoy privacy." She gathered her presentation notes. What matters is results. Neither of them noticed the black luxury sedan that had just turned into the underground executive entrance. The driver stepped out first. Then opened the rear passenger door. A distinguished elderly man slowly emerged. Gone were the faded janitor's uniform, the worn maintenance cap, and the old work boots. Instead, Benjamin Carter wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. A polished silver tie. Italian leather shoes. And the same humble smile he had always carried. The security guards standing outside immediately straightened. One of them spoke into his radio. "Attention. The owner has arrived." Inside the executive conference room, Victoria Reynolds took a deep breath and smiled confidently. She believed she was about to impress the most powerful person in the company. She had no idea. She had already fired him. The executive conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as investors settled into their seats. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the lights. Fresh coffee was poured. Folders containing financial reports were neatly arranged before every guest. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago stretched toward the horizon, but inside the room, every eye was focused on the presentation that would determine the company's next phase of growth. Victoria Reynolds stood confidently at the front of the room. Her tailored navy suit was immaculate. Her presentation remote rested comfortably in her hand. She had rehearsed every word. Every statistic. Every answer. Failure wasn't an option. Daniel Brooks leaned toward her. The chairman should be here any minute. Victoria smiled. Perfect timing. I'd like him to see what strong leadership looks like. Daniel gave a polite nod, though something about that sentence made him uncomfortable. Just then, the conference room doors opened. Every conversation stopped. The company's chief legal officer stepped inside first. Behind him walked two members of the board of directors. Everyone immediately stood. Victoria did the same. Then, a fourth person entered. Benjamin Carter. For several seconds, no one spoke. Victoria stared at the elderly man in complete disbelief. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. It couldn't be. The janitor? The old man she had fired less than 2 hours earlier. No. This wasn't possible. Benjamin was no longer wearing his faded maintenance uniform. Instead, he looked every bit the respected executive. His charcoal suit fit perfectly. His silver hair was neatly combed. The kindness in his eyes remained unchanged, but there was now a quiet confidence that commanded the room without a single word. Every board member greeted him warmly. Good morning, Mr. Carter. It's wonderful to see you. We're glad you're feeling well. Victoria looked around the room. Executives who rarely smiled were suddenly smiling. Investors shook Benjamin's hand with genuine respect. The legal team stepped aside to allow him to reach the head of the table. The seat reserved for the chairman was his. Daniel slowly turned toward Victoria. His face had gone pale. Victoria, she whispered without taking her eyes off Benjamin. Tell me. This is some kind of joke. Daniel swallowed hard. I don't think it is. Benjamin reached the head of the table. He looked around the room before speaking. His voice was calm. Warm. Gentle. Please. Everyone have a seat. No one moved until Benjamin sat down first. Only then did the others follow. Victoria lowered herself into her chair almost mechanically. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Nothing made sense anymore. Benjamin folded his hands. I know many of you have never met me. I prefer working quietly. I've always believed that a leader learns more by listening than by speaking. He smiled softly. For many years, I've walked these halls without titles. I've shared elevators with interns. I've had lunch beside receptionists. I've cleaned floors. Changed light bulbs. Emptied trash bins. A ripple of confusion spread among several investors. Benjamin continued. I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I simply chose not to introduce myself. Victoria's breathing became shallow. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Benjamin looked toward the large company logo displayed behind the screen. When my late wife and I founded Westbridge Technologies 40 years ago, we promised each other one thing. He paused. We would never become too important to understand the people who kept this company alive. Silence filled the room. I spent time in every department. I've worked alongside engineers, customer service representatives, warehouse employees, and yes, the maintenance team. He smiled. I learned far more carrying a mop than sitting behind this table. Several board members nodded with admiration. One elderly investor laughed softly. That's why your employee satisfaction numbers have always been extraordinary. Benjamin simply smiled. Then, his expression became more serious. This morning, I experienced something I had hoped I would never see inside this company. Victoria felt every pair of eyes slowly shifting toward her. Benjamin wasn't angry. if anything. He sounded disappointed. I watched an elderly employee be judged without anyone asking why he needed to sit down. I watched assumptions replace compassion. I watched fear silence good people. No one dared interrupt. Daniel lowered his eyes. He knew exactly what Benjamin was talking about. Benjamin continued quietly. A company's true culture isn't revealed during quarterly profits. It's revealed by how it treats the person with the lowest job title. The words struck every executive like a hammer. Victoria stared down at the conference table. For the first time in many years, she felt genuinely ashamed. Benjamin finally looked directly at her. Not with hatred. Not with revenge. Simply with sadness. Ms. Reynolds. Victoria slowly looked up. Yes. Her voice was barely audible. This morning, when I tried to explain that I wasn't feeling well, you never allowed me to finish. The room became perfectly silent. Benjamin continued. I've always believed every employee deserves to be heard. Whether they're the chief executive officer or the person cleaning the hallway. Victoria felt her face burn. She wanted to explain. To apologize. To say something. Anything. But no words came. Benjamin leaned back slightly. I've reviewed your performance for several years. Your intelligence is exceptional. Your work ethic is remarkable. You've increased productivity, reduced operating costs, and earned respect from investors. Victoria looked up, surprised. For one brief moment, hope returned to her face. Perhaps, she thought, he wasn't going to punish her after all. Benjamin's next sentence erased that hope completely. But leadership is measured by more than numbers. It is measured by character. And today, you failed the most important test. The room fell into complete silence. No presentation. No financial report. No investor discussion. Only one question remained. What would the owner of Westbridge Technologies do next? The silence inside the boardroom was almost unbearable. No one dared shuffle a paper. No one reached for a glass of water. Every executive sat frozen, waiting for Benjamin Carter's next words. Victoria Reynolds kept her eyes lowered. The confidence that had defined her only an hour earlier had completely disappeared. She had spent years believing that leadership meant being the toughest person in every room. Now, she wasn't sure she understood leadership at all. Benjamin folded his hands on the polished table. I didn't wear a janitor's uniform because I wanted to test people. He looked around the room. I wore it because it reminded me of where this company began. The investors listened carefully. When my wife, Eleanor, and I started Westbridge Technologies, we didn't have a corporate office. We rented a tiny warehouse. During the day, we built software. At night, we swept the floors ourselves. He smiled as if the memories were playing before him. There were days we couldn't afford employees. There were weeks we weren't sure we'd make payroll. So we did everything. We answered phones. We cleaned bathrooms. We unloaded delivery trucks. He paused. And we promised ourselves that if success ever came, we would never believe any job was beneath us. Several board members nodded. They had heard pieces of the company's history before. But never from Benjamin himself. My wife used to tell me something every morning. He looked toward the window for a moment. Benjamin, she'd say, if you ever stop respecting the people who clean your floors, you'll eventually stop respecting everyone else. His voice softened. I've carried those words with me every day since she passed away. The room remained quiet. Benjamin continued. After Eleanor died 8 years ago, I found myself spending less time in this boardroom. I missed hearing real conversations. I missed understanding what life felt like for our employees. So I quietly joined the maintenance team. A young investor blinked in surprise. You mean, none of them knew? Benjamin smiled. Only the board of directors. They honored my request. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted honesty. Daniel finally understood. That explained everything. Benjamin had never been spying. He had simply wanted to experience the company from the perspective of an ordinary employee. Benjamin continued. Over the years, I've met remarkable people. I've watched receptionists calm frightened clients. I've seen interns stay late to help coworkers. I've watched security officers buy dinner for employees stranded during snowstorms. His smile widened. I've also discovered future managers while they were still delivering mail. Several executives smiled. They knew exactly who he was referring to. Then Benjamin's expression became more serious. But lately, I've noticed something changing. The room grew quiet again. People have become afraid. Not inspired. They're afraid to ask questions. Afraid to admit mistakes. Afraid to speak honestly. He slowly turned toward Victoria. I don't believe fear builds great companies. It builds silent ones. Victoria closed her eyes. Every sentence felt painfully true. She remembered the nervous faces. The employees who stopped talking whenever she walked into a room. The managers who apologized before speaking. She had mistaken fear for respect. Benjamin wasn't finished. This morning, when I sat down, I wasn't testing anyone. My cardiologist had warned me to rest whenever I felt dizzy. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded medical report. The board has known about my heart condition for months. He slid the report across the table. The chief legal officer nodded. It's accurate. Benjamin looked back at Victoria. I wasn't asleep because I didn't care about my work. I was trying not to collapse. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She remembered seeing the bottle of medication roll across the floor. She remembered looking at it. And choosing to ignore it. That memory hurt more than anything Benjamin had said. Slowly, she stood from her chair. I'm ashamed. Her voice trembled. I judged you before I knew anything about you. She swallowed hard. And if I'm honest, I've been judging people that way for years. Nobody interrupted. I convinced myself that being a strong leader meant never showing sympathy. I thought kindness made managers weak. She looked directly at Benjamin. I was wrong. For the first time that morning, Benjamin smiled gently. It takes courage to admit that. Victoria took a deep breath. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Benjamin answered quietly. Perhaps not today. The words landed heavily. But forgiveness isn't something people earn with speeches. It's something they earn with change. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. Benjamin looked around the room. I could terminate Ms. Reynolds today. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. I certainly have that authority. Victoria closed her eyes. She expected to hear the words. You're fired. Instead, Benjamin surprised everyone. But if every person who made one serious mistake lost the opportunity to become better, this company would have no employees. The room became still. Benjamin stood. I don't want revenge. I want transformation. He looked toward the board of directors. I'll make my final decision tomorrow morning. Every executive looked surprised. Until then. He turned back to Victoria. I have one assignment for you. Victoria looked up. Anything. Benjamin handed her an old brass key. It looked worn from decades of use. This key opens the first office my wife and I ever rented. It's been preserved exactly as we left it. Victoria accepted it carefully. I want you to spend today there. No assistants. No laptop. No phone. Just you. And the story of how this company truly began. He walked toward the door before stopping one final time. When you understand the value of every person who helped build Westbridge, then you'll understand what leadership really means. With that, Benjamin quietly left the boardroom. The heavy doors closed behind him. No one spoke. Victoria stared at the old brass key resting in her hand. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't thinking about promotions, profits, or performance. She was thinking about one elderly janitor, whom she had never truly seen. Victoria Reynolds left the executive floor carrying nothing but the old brass key. For the first time since joining Westbridge Technologies 15 years earlier, she walked through the building without anyone rushing to hand her reports or ask for approval. Instead, employees quietly watched her pass. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered softly after she walked by. She couldn't blame them. Just that morning, they had watched her publicly dismiss an elderly janitor without listening to a single explanation. Now everyone knew that Janitor was Benjamin Carter, the founder and owner of the company. Victoria stepped into her car and drove across the city to a quiet brick building tucked between an old bookstore and a family-owned bakery. A faded bronze plaque by the entrance read, "Westbridge Technologies, Original Office. Established 1986. The building looked nothing like the sleek glass headquarters downtown. Its paint had faded with time. The wooden stairs creaked beneath every step. The hallway smelled faintly of old books and fresh coffee. She unlocked the weathered door with the brass key. As it swung open, she froze. The office had been preserved exactly as Benjamin had described. A tiny desk sat in one corner. Two mismatched chairs faced each other. An old computer rested beside stacks of handwritten notebooks. A worn coffee mug sat on the windowsill. Nothing had been modernized. It felt as though Benjamin and his wife had simply stepped out for lunch and never returned. Victoria walked slowly around the room. Every object told a story. On one wall hung dozens of photographs. She moved closer. The first picture showed a young Benjamin and Eleanor standing proudly beside a tiny company sign. Their clothes were simple. Their smiles were enormous. Another photograph showed them painting the office walls themselves. A third showed them sweeping the floor together late at night. Neither looked embarrassed. They looked proud. Victoria continued walking. A small wooden shelf held dozens of employee photographs from the company's earliest years. Each photo included handwritten notes. Michael fixed computers all night after his wife became ill. Promote him when we can afford it. Angela stayed until midnight helping answer customer calls. Remember her birthday. Carlos missed work because his son was in the hospital. Send flowers. Victoria stopped reading. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. Benjamin hadn't built a company by memorizing profits. He had built it by remembering people. She sat quietly behind the tiny wooden desk. There she found an old leather journal. Its pages had yellowed with age. The first page was written in Eleanor Carter's neat handwriting. A business grows because of people, not despite them. Victoria turned another page. If our employees are afraid to tell us the truth, then we have already failed as leaders. Another page. Never assume you know someone's story by looking at their job title. Victoria closed the journal and covered her face. Every lesson she had lived by seemed painfully incomplete. For years she had believed leadership meant demanding perfection. Benjamin and Eleanor had believed leadership meant serving others. The difference suddenly became impossible to ignore. Hours passed. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly drifted across the windows. Victoria continued exploring the office. She found old payroll records showing Benjamin and Eleanor paying employees first while delaying their own salaries. She found thank you letters from families whose medical bills the company had quietly covered. She found Christmas cards from workers who called Benjamin and Eleanor family. Then, inside the bottom drawer of the desk, she discovered a sealed envelope. Across the front were handwritten words. To any leader who someday forgets why this company exists. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single letter. She began reading aloud. Success has a dangerous habit. It convinces people that titles make them important. But titles only reveal responsibility. Character reveals greatness. The cleaner who quietly finishes every task with integrity deserves the same respect as the executive making million-dollar decisions. Without one, the building becomes dirty. Without the other, the company loses direction. Neither succeeds alone. Victoria couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She finally understood. She had spent years measuring employees by position instead of purpose. At that very moment, back at headquarters, Benjamin quietly walked through the maintenance department. The janitorial staff immediately gathered around him. One elderly cleaner stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Carter, we're so sorry about what happened this morning." Benjamin smiled gently. "None of this was your fault." Another employee lowered her head. "We wanted to speak up. We were just afraid." Benjamin's smile faded. "I know." He looked around the room. "And that's exactly what worries me." No one said a word. Benjamin continued. "If good people become afraid to defend what's right, then leadership has already begun to fail." Later that evening, Benjamin received a phone call from his granddaughter, Emma. "Grandpa, how are you feeling?" "I'm much better." "Did the meeting go well?" Benjamin chuckled softly. "It became a lesson." Emma laughed. "You always turn problems into lessons." Benjamin looked out his office window as the city lights began to glow. Punishment changes behavior for a moment, but understanding can change a person forever. Miles away, Victoria carefully folded Eleanor's letter and placed it back inside the envelope. As she stood to leave, she looked around the tiny office one last time. She had entered that morning believing she was one of the greatest leaders in the company. She walked out realizing she had only just begun learning what leadership truly meant. But one question still remained. Would Benjamin Carter believe she deserved another chance? The next morning, Westbridge Technologies felt different. The usual chatter in the lobby had been replaced by quiet anticipation. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering about yesterday's extraordinary events. Some believed Victoria Reynolds had already been dismissed. Others expected Benjamin Carter to announce sweeping changes throughout the company. No one knew what was about to happen. At precisely 8 o'clock, Victoria walked through the revolving doors. She wasn't dressed in the expensive designer suit everyone was used to seeing. Instead, she wore a simple gray business outfit with almost no jewelry. Her confident stride had softened. For the first time in years, she smiled at the receptionist. "Good morning, Lisa." The young woman looked surprised. Good morning, Ms. Reynolds." Victoria noticed the hesitation in her voice. A week ago, she would have walked straight past without noticing. Today, she understood why Lisa seemed nervous. She had created that fear. As she crossed the lobby, she greeted the security guards by name. She thanked the maintenance team for keeping the building spotless. She even stopped to hold the elevator door for several employees. People exchanged confused glances. Was this really the same Victoria Reynolds? Inside the executive conference room, the board of directors had already gathered. Benjamin Carter sat quietly at the head of the table. He looked healthier than he had the previous day, though his calm expression revealed nothing about the decision he was about to make. Victoria entered and stood before everyone. She didn't sit down. She didn't carry presentation slides. Only a small notebook rested in her hands. Benjamin looked at her kindly. "You asked to speak before the meeting. Go ahead." Victoria nodded. She took a deep breath. "I spent yesterday in the original Westbridge office." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I thought I was going there to learn about the history of this company." She looked around the room. "I was actually learning about myself." Every eye remained fixed on her. "I've spent years believing that results were all that mattered. I believed people had to fear me in order to respect me. I confused authority with leadership." She looked toward Daniel Brooks. "Daniel. I'm sorry. You tried to remind me to show compassion. I ignored you." Daniel offered a small, understanding smile. Victoria then turned toward the human resources team. "I've placed impossible pressure on many of you. I expected perfection without recognizing humanity." Several members quietly nodded. Then she faced Benjamin. The room became perfectly silent. "I owe you the greatest apology of all." Her voice trembled. "When I saw you sitting in that hallway, I didn't see a human being. I saw an inconvenience. I judged you without listening. I ignored clear signs that you needed help." She lowered her head. "I am deeply sorry." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I cannot erase what I did. But if I am given another opportunity, I promise that every decision I make will begin with one question." She paused. Do I know the whole story? Benjamin remained silent. Victoria continued. If the answer is no, I will listen first. The room stayed quiet for several moments. Benjamin finally stood. He slowly walked around the table until he stood directly in front of Victoria. Everyone watched closely. He spoke softly. Yesterday, you apologized because you had been exposed. Victoria nodded. Yes. Benjamin continued. Today, you apologized because you understood. She nodded again. Yes. Benjamin smiled gently. There's a very important difference. Victoria looked up. Benjamin placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. My wife used to tell me that the strongest people are not those who never make mistakes. They are the ones humble enough to grow after making them. He stepped back. Ms. Reynolds, I accept your apology. Victoria closed her eyes in relief. But, Benjamin added, forgiveness does not remove responsibility. She nodded immediately. I understand. Benjamin returned to the front of the room. I've made my decision. Every executive leaned forward. As of today, Victoria held her breath. You will remain Chief Operations Officer. A wave of surprise swept across the room. Victoria herself looked stunned. Benjamin raised one finger. Under one condition. She answered immediately. Anything. Benjamin smiled. For the next 6 months, you will spend one day each week working in a different department. The reception desk. Customer service. The warehouse. The cafeteria. The maintenance team. And every employee there will treat you exactly like one of them. Victoria nodded without hesitation. I'd be honored. Benjamin looked around the room. And every executive sitting here. He paused. Will do the same. The board members exchanged surprised looks. Some laughed softly. Others smiled. Benjamin continued. If you want to lead people, you must first understand their work. The room filled with quiet applause. Daniel smiled broadly. For the first time in years, the atmosphere felt hopeful instead of tense. Benjamin wasn't finished. I also have another announcement. He pressed a button on the conference room remote. The company logo disappeared. A new title appeared on the large screen. The Eleanor Carter Leadership Program. Benjamin smiled. This program will train every future manager in one simple principle. He looked around the room. Character before authority. The room erupted into applause. Victoria joined in. Not because she had been spared, but because she finally understood the kind of company Westbridge was meant to be. As the applause faded, Benjamin glanced toward the window. His late wife's reflection seemed almost present in his memory. He smiled quietly. I think you would have approved, Eleanor. But Benjamin had one final surprise. One that would change not only Victoria's future, but the future of every employee. 1 month later, Westbridge Technologies no longer felt like the same company. The atmosphere had changed in ways no financial report could measure. Employees who once walked the hallways in silence now greeted one another with smiles. Managers spent more time listening than giving orders. Department meetings became conversations instead of lectures. The change didn't happen because of a new policy. It happened because leadership had changed. And no one had changed more than Victoria Reynolds. It was Monday morning, her scheduled day in the maintenance department. Instead of arriving at the executive parking garage, Victoria entered through the employee entrance wearing a navy maintenance uniform. Her polished heels had been replaced with comfortable work shoes. A name tag on her shirt simply read, Victoria. No title. No executive badge. No reserved parking space. She picked up a mop and cleaning cart before reporting to the maintenance supervisor, Frank Miller, a cheerful 60-year-old employee who had worked with Benjamin for nearly 20 years. Frank smiled warmly. Good morning. Victoria returned the smile. Good morning. You'll be working with me today. I'll do my best. Frank handed her a pair of gloves. I know you will. They spent the morning cleaning conference rooms, polishing windows, emptying trash bins, and preparing meeting spaces before employees arrived. It wasn't glamorous work. It was physically exhausting. After only 2 hours, Victoria's back ached. Her hands were sore. She looked at Frank. "How do you do this every day?" Frank chuckled. "You get used to it." Then he added with a smile. "But it's a lot easier when someone notices." Those words stayed with Victoria. As they worked, employees walked past. Many smiled. Some thanked Frank for keeping the offices clean. Others greeted Victoria with surprise. No one mocked her. In fact, they respected her more than ever. Later that afternoon, Victoria noticed a young intern accidentally spilling coffee across the lobby floor. The young man froze. His face turned pale. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean it." Victoria smiled. "It's okay." She handed him paper towels. "We'll clean it together." The intern looked stunned. You're helping me." She laughed softly. "Of course." Benjamin happened to walk through the lobby just in time to witness the moment. He said nothing. He simply smiled to himself. That evening, the board of directors met again. Benjamin opened the meeting with a single question. "What changes have you noticed?" Daniel Brooks answered first. "Employee complaints have dropped by nearly 60%. Another executive added. "Sick leave has decreased." A third smiled. "Customer satisfaction has reached its highest level in company history." Benjamin nodded. "And profits?" The chief financial officer smiled. "They've increased." Several board members looked surprised. Benjamin wasn't. When people feel respected, they naturally do their best work. He looked around the room. Kindness and excellence are not competitors. They're partners. The room fell quiet as everyone reflected on those words. A week later, Benjamin invited the entire company to gather in the main atrium. More than 1,000 employees filled the spacious lobby. Some stood on balconies overlooking the crowd. Others watched from nearby offices. Victoria stood near the front, unsure why everyone had been called together. Benjamin stepped onto the small stage. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He had returned to his familiar maintenance uniform. The crowd smiled the moment they saw him. He adjusted the microphone. "When I founded this company with my wife, I dreamed of building more than successful products. I dreamed of building a place where every person mattered." He looked around the packed atrium. "For a while, we lost sight of that dream. But dreams can be found again." The crowd applauded. Benjamin raised his hand toward the maintenance staff standing together near the back. "I'd like every member of our maintenance team to come forward." They hesitated. Then slowly walked toward the stage. Benjamin shook each person's hand. One by one. He thanked every cleaner, every custodian, every technician, every maintenance worker. Then he turned toward the audience. "These men and women arrive before most of us. They leave after most of us. They keep this building safe. They make sure our workplace is ready every single day. They deserve more than appreciation. They deserve respect." The atrium erupted into applause. Many employees stood. Soon, everyone was standing. The applause continued for nearly 2 minutes. Several maintenance workers wiped tears from their eyes. Frank quietly whispered to Victoria, "In 20 years, no one has ever thanked us like this." Victoria felt tears welling in her own eyes. She finally understood. Respect wasn't something reserved for executives. It belonged to everyone. Benjamin smiled warmly. "Beginning today, our maintenance staff will receive expanded benefits, annual leadership scholarships for their children, and a company recognition program honoring outstanding service." The applause became even louder. Victoria joined in enthusiastically. Benjamin then looked toward her. "Ms. Reynolds." She stepped onto the stage. "I have one question." She nodded. "What have you learned?" Victoria looked across the thousands of employees before answering. She smiled through tears. I learned that the most important people in a company are often the ones no one notices. The crowd applauded again. Benjamin nodded proudly. Exactly. But before the celebration ended, Benjamin had one final announcement. One that no one, including Victoria, expected. The applause slowly faded, but the emotion in the atrium remained. Employees looked at one another with smiles that hadn't been there just a month earlier. For many of them, Westbridge Technologies no longer felt like just a workplace. It felt like a community. Benjamin Carter stepped back to the microphone. I have one final announcement. The room became silent again. Many assumed he was about to announce his retirement. Others believed he would introduce another leadership initiative. No one expected what came next. Benjamin smiled warmly. 40 years ago, my wife and I founded this company with one dream. To build a business that would continue serving people long after we were gone. He paused as he looked around the room. I am 72 years old. A few employees exchanged concerned glances. My doctors have encouraged me to slow down. He chuckled softly. I suppose they're right. Light laughter spread through the crowd. I've spent many years wondering who should help guide Westbridge into its next chapter. Benjamin looked toward the board of directors. I never searched for the smartest person. I never searched for the toughest person. I searched for someone willing to grow. His eyes settled on Victoria. She looked surprised. Benjamin continued. A month ago, I wouldn't have trusted Victoria Reynolds with that responsibility. The room became completely still. Victoria lowered her head. She understood why. Benjamin smiled. But people should never be permanently defined by their worst day. Those words echoed through the atrium. The true measure of character is what someone becomes after facing the truth. Benjamin motioned for Victoria to join him. With hesitant steps, she walked onto the stage. She stood beside the men she had once dismissed without compassion. Benjamin faced the crowd. This woman made a painful mistake. He paused. But instead of defending herself, she chose to learn. Instead of protecting her pride, she embraced humility. Instead of demanding respect, she earned it. The audience erupted into applause. Many employees who had once feared Victoria now smiled proudly. Benjamin reached into his jacket and removed a small velvet box. Inside was an elegant silver company pin. It bore the original Westbridge logo that Benjamin and Eleanor had designed 4 decades earlier. He carefully fastened it to Victoria's jacket. This pin has only been worn by 2 people. My wife. And me. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Benjamin smiled. Then simply promise me one thing. She nodded. Anything. When you walk through these halls, never ask, who is the most important person here? He paused. Instead ask, whose story haven't I heard yet? A tear rolled down Victoria's cheek. I promise. Benjamin gently shook her hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, Victoria stepped toward the maintenance team. She turned to Frank. I'm sorry. She then faced every cleaner standing nearby. I'm sorry to all of you. I overlooked your value. I promise. That will never happen again. Frank smiled warmly. We already know. The entire maintenance team applauded. Several employees wiped tears from their eyes. Daniel Brooks leaned toward another executive and whispered, "This company just became stronger than it has ever been." The executive nodded. Not because of new technology, but because of new leadership. Benjamin returned to the microphone one last time. I've learned something over the years. He smiled. A clean floor may never appear on a financial report, but the person who cleaned it reflects the heart of this company. The crowd stood once more. The applause lasted longer than before. As Benjamin looked across the faces of the employees, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. Respect. Unity. He quietly looked upward, remembering Eleanor. In his heart, he could almost hear her gentle voice. You kept our promise. Benjamin smiled. Yes. I think we did. 6 months later. Westbridge Technologies was recognized as one of the best places to work in America. Employee satisfaction reached a record high. Staff turnover dropped dramatically. Productivity continued to increase. More importantly, employees no longer feared speaking honestly. Managers regularly worked alongside frontline staff. The Eleanor Carter Leadership Program became a model adopted by companies across the country. And every new employee, whether hired as an executive, an engineer, a receptionist, or a janitor, heard the same story during orientation. The story of an elderly janitor who was fired for sleeping at work. Only for everyone to discover he owned the company. Not because the twist was entertaining, but because the lesson was unforgettable. Never judge someone's worth by their position. The greatest leaders don't demand respect, they show it. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one with the greatest story to tell. The end. Red Heart.